Hi guys, and welcome to my showcase and tutorial for Wormholes. Wormholes is a plugin that will spawn pairs of wormholes randomly throughout the map. These wormholes can be used to teleport from one end of the hole to the other, providing temporarily faster traversal of the map. When the player approaches the door, there will be information about the wormhole itself, such as time remaining, uses remaining, and destination. The values for these parameters are completely configurable, as is the visibility of the information. In addition to the time and usage limits, reactivation delays, or better known as polarization, will prevent players from spamming the activation of wormholes. These values are also fully customizable. There are loads of other options to prevent usage of the wormhole system, such as when a player is bleeding, starving, dehydrated, when they're too cold, when they're too hot, when they're wounded, when they're irradiated, when they're escape blocked, when they're raid blocked, or when they're combat blocked. So we're going to go through the configuration file to show you how sort of customizable this plugin is. So we're going to start here, under Wormhole spawn settings. So spawn attempts to find a good grid to spawn a wormhole before we give up. So basically what will happen is that the plugin will attempt to find a grid, and then it'll attempt to find another grid that's a set amount of spaces away. So for example, if you wanted to spawn at A1 and then you want it to be at least 5 grids away, it would then be able to spawn at say F13 or G15 or whatever. Whereas it wouldn't be able to spawn at A2 if it was too close. So it tries to find, it attempts this many times in order to find a suitable grid, and if it can't, it just gives up. And then within those grids, there are many potential spawn locations, depending on things like topology and buildings and everything else. So this is how many attempts it's going to try before it gives up in terms of finding an actual vector 3 position to spawn the doors in. So for example, if a player base is in the way there, or if something's sitting in the way of a door and has nowhere to spawn, it'll look for another valid spawn location. How often should we check to see if a wormhole timer is up? So this is basically is how often the wormholes will sort of update their information. So every 60 seconds by default, it'll check it every 60 seconds and see if it's expired, and if it is, it'll despawn the wormhole. Minimum amount of time that the wormhole should stay active. This is basically its duration, so how long it should actually stay up and running for before it despawns. And this is the minimum and the maximum time, so it picks a random number between those values. The minimum amount of players that can use the wormhole before it despawns, so this is the usage limits, and this is the maximum amount of players. So again, you've got those lower and upper thresholds, and it'll pick a random number in between, but if you do set it to -1, it won't actually have a limit. And what happens is each side the wormhole is activated, regardless of what side it's activated from, it'll count towards the usage. Minimum amount of time before a new wormhole spawns. This isn't actually the default values. I've just lowered these for testing. It should be sort of every 30 to 60 minutes or something thereabouts. But basically these are how many seconds between spawns. So it'll pick a random number between these two values, and then after that time has elapsed, it'll spawn a new wormhole. So you can have multiple wormholes existing on a map at any given time. Even wormholes within the same grid, so you can have two wormholes in grid D2, one that might take you over to G7 and one takes you to E21, for instance. Now go on to wormhole settings. So how long after using a wormhole should a player be blocked for? So basically this means when a player activates, so say for example to go from A1 to F1, if a player goes from A1 to F1 and this is set to above 0, and if they then go from F1 back to A1, they won't be able to use either the A1 or the F1 portal for this period of time. So this is based on activation. So if a player activates the portal at A1 and then attempts to activate the portal again at A1 within this time frame, it will prevent them from doing so. Whereas if they activate the portal from A1 and then go to F1, it will let them activate the portal immediately in F1 because they have no cooldown on that particular portal. Allow the player to use wormholes or bleeding, starving, dehydrated, cold, hot, wounded, irradiated, escape blocked, raid blocked, and combat blocked. These ones here are plugin APIs for the relevant plugins. The rest are all just sort of natural metabolism states. And you can set them to true and false however you please. Floating text settings. So this is the text that appears above the doors. So if you want that text to be displayed, this is set that to true by default. How far away can the text be seen from? So basically it'll check I think it's every 5 seconds Yeah, by default. So every 5 seconds, it's going to check how many players are within 5 Rust units away from the door, and if so, it's going to show them the door information. You can set that to whatever you like, as well as the update poll rate to whatever you like. The higher the poll rate, like the lower the number, the more impactful it'll be on performance, obviously, but it should be pretty minor anyway. How far above the door spawn point should the text show? By default, it's 3, so it kind of just offsets above the door. Play with that value as you will. The RGB color, this is the actual color of the text, so it uses a floating RGB value. So for example, if you want it to just be red, you'd set that to 1.0 and these to 0.0. If you want it to be purple, you'd set that to 1.0, that to 0.0, and that to 1.0. So it basically works like RGB, except instead of 255 being the cap, it's 1.0. Show the destination grid for the description. So if you don't want that destination grid being shown, you can set that to false. Same thing for time remaining and uses remaining. So again, if you don't want that information being shown, you set those values to false and it won't show the lines in the draw. Minimum distance that a player can build from the wormhole when active, 0 means off. Basically, if you don't want players building on top of a wormhole, next to a wormhole, or too close to a wormhole, for example, turret camping it, you can set that to whatever you like. Wormhole spawn directives, so these are like things like the when a wormhole actually spawns, how it kind of works. So it'll play this particular sound effect or this particular effect file. So that's the sound of a explosion happening. We've also got the radius the effect can be heard from, so this is how far away the new sort of wormhole spawning can be heard from, and then obviously it gives the player the direction as well. Allow wormholes to spawn inside of monuments, so if you set that to true, it means it's not going to ignore the monument modifiers. Allow wormholes to spawn on the ocean floor, so again it's going to allow for them to spawn in the ocean on the floor if you set that to true. So how many grid squares away does the wormhole need to be from each other? So for example, if this comes back to this part here, if you set a very large number and you've got a very small map, that might not work. So yeah, 5.0 seems to be a pretty good value. Basically, it'll pick a number between whatever this is and then the total number of grids. So it could spawn from A1 down to AA1 or whatever. It depends on your map size. And then zone manager settings. So list of zone IDs that wormholes are not allowed to spawn inside of. So if you want, obviously, zone manager exclusion zones, just add the zone manager ID information in here, and it will be excluded from spawning. Outside of that, that's all there is to it. Pretty cool, like simple plugin. Yeah, very sort of low impact in terms of performance and whatnot. Just sort of floating doors. And yeah, connecting via wormholes. Very heavily inspired by EVE Online. So if that wasn't blatantly obvious. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, any feedback, any suggestions, feel free to hit me up as always. And hope you guys enjoy.